So today I'm going to be talking about the new Sorare scoring matrix. There's been quite a bit of discussion about this in the last couple of days, with pretty much a surprise, to be honest. I think there's been talk about the matrix changing for a while without any indication that it was truly coming. Sorare have surprised us all this week with an announcement of a new scoring matrix. So I thought I'd do a quick video today just to dive into some of the changes, things that immediately stand out to me, talk about some potential winners and losers. Let's begin. First off, they've changed all positions. There's a few tweaks, mostly around possession loss, around final third passes. The goalkeeper is the position that changes the most and forward the least from the sort of initial signs that I've seen. If you're interested in diving into it more, then they do have the Medium article, but what we're going to do today is just go through a couple of these, run through each position, what's changed, and then we will talk about a couple of players. What's really interesting here is that Sorare have talked about fixing imbalance between fullback and centre backs. I think that is something that immediately stands out to me. Update goalkeeper scores to accurately reflect real-life performance. That's another one that really stands out. I think it was always quite maddening to see a goalkeeper that had maybe conceded 5, 6 or 7 goals not losing any further points deductions after the first 3. So Sorare have definitely addressed that. Might be a little bit too harsh, because you are now, if we scroll down and have a look at what's happening, we are now losing 3 points for every goal conceded. So if you think about how that works in context of the decisive actions, the drop off from conceding 0 goals to 1 goal is now going to be very high. The drop off from 2 goals to 3 goals is also going to be very significant. So they haven't addressed what I would sort of describe as the cliff edges in scoring that we used to get, but they have made it more accurately reflect the fact that bad keepers are now bad goalkeepers. What was sort of maddening is that they never used to give points for passes. So if you were a goalkeeper in a team that was very possession dominant, the team played well, the team didn't give up many chances, the team didn't concede many goals, you wouldn't really score any points. You'd normally get negative AA points from missed passes or possession lost. They've addressed that, so now we do have accurate passes into the final third. That to me is what really stands out in this. It's really going to separate the good goalkeepers from the bad. It's also really going to favour goalkeepers in possession dominant teams. So that's the one that sort of immediately stands out to me here. If we flip over to goalkeepers that I think this has a positive impact on, there's sort of 2 that really do stand out. The first one is Hendrik van Krombrugge of Anderlecht. Anderlecht tend to have a very high possession. We're still to see if that drops off a little bit with Mazu replacing Company, but I think what I wanted to talk through today was the understanding of how this impacts how particular types of players score. This isn't to say this player is now a sure bet, this player is going to fall off. It's more about giving a fundamental understanding of the types of players that you're looking for. So you look at Van Krombrugge and we look at the difference between the new matrix and the old matrix. If you see, there's quite a significant difference here. So his L5 goes from 39 to 42, his L15 goes from 49 to 52. So what's influencing that? Well, Anderlecht are a team that do not concede many goals. They have quite a low XGA. They're also very possession dominant. If you look at all challenger goalkeepers, Van Krombrugge's stats from last season puts him in the really top end bucket of passes per game. So you're looking at getting about 30 passes a game from Van Krombrugge under Company. We still need to roll the data set out a little bit more under Mazu to see the impact there. But I'd say if you're looking to make changes based on the matrix changes, or you're looking to understand, how will your goalkeepers perform, the key for me is possession dominant teams with a low expected goals against, because it really does separate the good from the bad. And I think that's one thing to really, really note here. So Van Krombrug is the first example. The other is Mike Maignan. So at AC Milan, it's another example of a goalkeeper in a possession dominant side that has a low expected goals against. And if you look here, the flip between the new and the old matrix, L5 was 53, that's now up to 56. The L15 was 62, that's up to 66. So what I believe is the real thing to take out from the changes to the goalkeeper position is that team performance matters more than it did before. You always had that sort of stop, it was the way they scored goals against, it put the brakes on a bad performance. You would always have, even if you conceded 6 goals, you were still on 15 points from a decisive action, whereas now you can reduce that AA further. So it's really, the way I see it is that if your keeper didn't keep a clean sheet, then you're out of the running anyway for prizes that are worthwhile. Whereas now it really, really accentuates that, and you're not going to have these cases where you've had a goalkeeper that's conceded 7 goals, but because their team has been so atrocious, they've ended up making they've made 5 or 6 saves and conceded 7. So their save percentage is still abysmal. It's less than 50%. But because they've had so many shots against, they've ended up racking up AA and not having any negative deductions as a result of the increased goals conceded. That has changed. That means that by far and away the biggest losers of this change are goalkeepers in bad teams. So Rafa Roma is a great example of this. He's a goalkeeper in a terrible team that conceded a bunch of goals and was previously protected by the scoring floor within the matrix. That has now changed. So if we have a look here, if we look at what his scores would have been on the new matrix, the game against Philadelphia, where DC conceded 7 goals, his new score, AA, would have been minus 2.7. Whereas if we flip to see what he actually scored under the old matrix, he actually had 15.9, because he wasn't receiving any negative points for anything conceded after 3 goals. So that for me is really the biggest change here, is that the goalkeepers that you're looking for, it's all about the quality of the team. It's not simply a case of just having any goalkeeper for the sake of it. It's sort of mirrored other positions where you have more of a separation between good and bad. Historically, all goalkeeper scores used to just be pretty flat. They kind of, if they kept a clean sheet, they might go between 60 and 70. If they didn't, they'd score somewhere between 35 and 50, depending on their AA. This really changes that. Personally, I think it's good because it's more reflective of real life performance. What would I have liked to have seen? I think potentially goals conceded it's gone from being not harsh enough to possibly too harsh. I don't think you need to double dip the negatives when you're looking at that first and the third goal conceded, because you're already getting negative deductions from that as inherent within the scoring matrix and how the decisive action score is calculated. But overall, I think it's very good that we have seen that accurate passing has been included in there, because for me it never made any sense that you were deducted for a missed pass but you never got anything for actually completing it. You've also got one sort of change here, although the number of actions is so low, is that sweeper keeper has been slightly reduced. So all in all, that is the sort of thoughts and summaries on goalkeepers. Let's move on to defenders. So defenders, there's a lot more going on here. The big changes are goal conceded has now doubled, so that has a really big impact on separating the teams that defend well from the teams that don't. So that's a big one to watch out for. Error leading to a shot has gone from -1 to -5, but that happens so rarely that it's just not going to have a significant impact on a wide spread of players. Fouls is another one. So this is really interesting when we sort of look at how they've separated the good from the bad in goalkeeping. They've also kind of done it here, because if you're on a team that just gets absolutely pumped week in, week out, and you are conceding a lot of goals, you're making a lot of fouls because you're under pressure, this is a really big change. It really separates. And this isn't position dependent, this is like quality of team dependent. But I think, there doesn't need to be... This isn't position dependent, this is quality of team dependent. But I think, where I've seen negativity on this is people that are assuming that every card in the game should be good. Like, I don't actually agree on that front. Like, you will have some good players, you'll have some bad players. What I will try to do today is give an indication of how this scoring matrix influences who scores what. That's the sort of one there, and that's sort of like not position dependent, that's quality of team dependent. The one that is position dependent here is looking at the deductions for possession lost. So the deduction for possession lost decreases, and so does the bonus for accurate pass and accurate pass into the final third. So what they've attempted to do here, and I actually think that it's a good thing, is that they've attempted to add balance between fullbacks and centre-backs. Historically, centre-backs that were in possession dominant teams were absolutely elite, particularly the ones that were playing short lateral passes just into the borderline of what you'd consider the final third of the pitch. This has changed, so when you look at who benefits and who doesn't benefit, it's actually very, very small. It's a small deduction on centre-backs. So people like Jurriën and Timber are still going to be as elite, but they're just not going to get quite as many points per game from what I call very simple passes. What is still protected is accurate long balls. So possession dominant ball playing centre backs will still score well under this matrix, but it's more about the long passes and about passes into the final third from distance, rather than what you saw with Ajax last season, which was Jurriën Timber and Lautaro Martinez basically what you saw last year was Jurriën Timber and Lisandro Martinez essentially just playing lateral balls, dominating possession against teams at the low block. This has minimised that slightly, but you still get players like Gvardiol, you get players like Badiashile, who they are in possession dominant teams, but they are tending to switch the play. So they're playing long balls from one side to the other. That's still protected under this. So when you're looking at the possession dominant centre backs, it's looking at what percentage of their passes are long balls versus what are short passes to the final third. And also possession lost as well. So this is where it sort of balances the fullbacks. So what it's doing here, and there's no one, you see players like Trent have really rocketed in interest. That is a combination of two factors. It's the fact that possession lost is minimised ever so slightly, and that the goals conceded have doubled. So what you're seeing there is Trent is a absolute outlier example of a player who is a very creative fullback in a team that does not concede many goals. And there are a couple of examples like this, and I'll come on to that now. And I'd say they are the biggest winners, but it doesn't fundamentally change it so significantly that it's completely rocking the boat. And this is what I like about it, is it's adding an element of balance, but it's not destroying the investments of people that have bought into elite ball playing centre backs. All it is sort of, taking off a couple of points off the peak of those and bringing in a couple of extra points per game to fullbacks, creative fullbacks. So a couple of examples of players that I believe that will benefit from this. Sergio Gomez is one. So he is, that example of a player that he's on set pieces, so that really helps with the creativity. It also helps minimise possession loss, because historically what you'd have is basically a 3-point swing on a corner. You'd either get plus 2 points for a key pass, or you get minus 1 point for an incompleted or a possession loss. This smooths that off. So if you can find ball-playing centre-backs that will be in teams that do not concede many goals, that's basically the ones that will benefit most from this. Kai Wagner is another one. So he's left back, he's very creative, he takes set pieces, he plays for Philadelphia, who do not concede many goals. That's another one that is really in this category of has benefited from changes to the defending scoring matrix. Another one is Theo Hernandez. So, if we look at just sort of toggling his scores here, he was L5 of 63, L15 of 65. That's now jumped up to a 65 and 69. So if I were to say who is the biggest winner of this, it's definitely Theo. The fact that Mike Magnan as well has had a bit of a benefit, it makes the AC Milan stack really, really interesting for Champion Europe next season, and could even rival Bayern based on the number of clean sheets that they get. So that would sort of be it. Who are the losers? Well, nobody really loses that much, but a couple of the ones that sort of stood out to me were players that are just sort of playing those short tippy-tappy passes into the final third that just don't really advance play. Also, players that are encouraged to make tactical fouls. So if you've got teams that are playing a high defensive line with a manager that uses tactical fouls as a way of defending against that, then that has a bit of an impact on the players' scores. Eric Garcia is one such player, and if we look at the sort of toggle here, L5 76 57 under the new, under the old he was 80 and 61. So there is a bit of a drop there. We're talking sort of 3 points a game on average. But what is really important to note here is that everything I've seen and all the data points that I've seen referenced around this are average scores. Average scores don't win you prizes, peak scores win you prizes. So what is really interesting here is what impact does it have on peak scores? And what's really interesting about this is that players that lose possession a lot tend to lose possession in matches where they are the dominant side. So to give an example of how this impacts peak scores, let's just take a look at Sergio Gomez playing at Ostend last season. When playing at home and playing against weaker opposition is when players tend to lose possession more often. So if we look at Ostend here, the match here, Sergio Gomez actually lost possession 26 times. So under the old matrix that would have been minus 26 points. Under the new it's minus 15.6. So he gets a 9-point swing in matches where he's already potentially got the chance of getting a decisive and getting an assist. So what this is really going to do is it's going to increase the peaks of fullbacks, and that's sort of what I find very, very interesting about players such as Sergio Gomez, is how it influences those peak scores. So that's one thing that I sort of really take away from this, is if you're looking at analysing your own data, you're analysing the impact on your own gallery, is not just look at what it does on average, because you'll lose some of the value of the data by just extrapolating out over the whole season. What does it do to the peaks? And what does it do to the peaks to fullbacks in the games where they're most likely to score well? It gives them an increased opportunity for a peak. So that's what I find really exciting. And when you look at it, and what you'll basically have is you'll still have the centre backs in possession dominant sides are those consistent 60s, consistent 70s. Fullbacks are still going to be peaks and troughs, but what it's really going to do is accentuate those peaks. So in the good weeks, they're really going to be good. And I think that it does play into the hands of any manager that tries to play fixtures. So that's sort of one thing that I would really take out of it. And it's sort of the defensive side. Obviously, again, because of the negative points on goals conceded, you want these kind of players in strong teams. Next up, we're going to go on to midfielders. What does this do? Well, they talk about a slight imbalance between defensive and offensive midfielders. But what, for me, this really does is it makes 8s really attractive. So if you've got someone that's box to box, they win interceptions, they create chances, those are the type of players that really benefit from this. Who loses out? It's kind of the 10s. It's, you know, there's a lot of MLS players that lose out because they're 10s. They don't have a high pass completion rate, and they have less than 50% dual win rate. So those are the sort of the matrix points or the stats that I'm looking at for midfielders are: how many interceptions do they make, and what's their pass completion rate? Realistically, you're looking at over 80%. Anything under 80% is not great. So if you notice that the Carlos Gil doesn't really get negatively impacted by this, even though I said 10s on the whole do. And their dual win rate. So, you know, if they are someone that is attempting a lot of duels, not completing them, whether they are dribbling or whether they are trying to win a tackle and they're just not very good at it, that's the sort of real nuances of this. Is it's not just defensive midfielders got better. It's the 8s that have really got better. And, you know, when you look at who is that, like who does that translate to in the game? It's the boy Gedson Fernandez. You know, he's probably the biggest winner from this. You know, if he settles at Besiktas, he could be very good this season, because he is someone that has defensive and offensive output. Sangare is another one that looks to be good from this. But you know what this is doing, if we look at the new matrix, 98, 70, the old matrix 96, 67. So we've obviously not got a sample size of his data at his new club, but he is the profile of player that I'm now really looking for on the back of this matrix change. It's the 8s, it's the teams that press, players that win the ball and drive forward. You know, another such example of this is Brian Haynen at Genk. You know, he's not as elite as Gedson is showing on scores, but if you look at the average scores here, it definitely takes a little boost, a couple of points over his L15, which, you know, is really good when you look at the AA. Again, it's going to be exactly the same situation when we talk about defenders. It's raising the peaks. You know, you want to look at how are the peaks being raised, rather than just simply looking at average scores. So that's, you know, an important one to take. Who are the big losers from this? Well, one player in my gallery, the boy Luciano Acosta. He wasn't elite in his AA anyway. This does take him down a little bit, just because of the fact that he doesn't have high pass completion rate. You know, he's trying more, you know, Hollywood balls. He's not playing it simple. He's also someone that gets stuck in but doesn't always win the tackle. So that's where he's getting hit, is on the, you know, the changes on the possession side, and he's also getting hit on the duel side as well. So, you know, that's something I sort of really take out from here, is, you know, the sort of old school 10 that doesn't do a lot of defensive work but also doesn't play it safe, is someone that's going to lose a couple of points a game here. Still, it's not, you know, I've got Luke Cho. I'm not planning to sell Luke Cho because he's still a very decisive, capable midfielder. So all it's doing is sort of smoothing off his peaks a little bit. It sort of chips a couple of points a game off when he's been you know, trying to attempt duels and not winning them, basically. So nothing like groundbreaking here, just a slight shift in, you know, bringing up the 8s, in my opinion. Finally, and talking of slight shifts, is forwards. And honestly, I'm not really going to bring any examples in here because it's so few players that this impacts. Forward is really light touch in terms of the changes they've made. The one that really disappoints me is that Big Chance Missed is still in there. We haven't got rid of big chance miss. That was one that I really wanted to see addressed, just because of the how subjective it is. What's it done? It's increased dual 1 from 0.5 to 1. It's increased interceptions from nothing to 3. In all truth, very few forwards make that many interceptions. All it does to me is it just adds a couple of points a game onto some forwards. They're still very decisive driven. Not a lot has changed here in terms of forwards, but it does accentuate dual win rate again. So you really want to be looking for players that have more than 50% dual win rate, because otherwise they're going to be losing more AA than they were before. That's the only really point that I'd take to note out of here. And that's sort of it. That sort of draws it to the conclusions. Overall, I think it was a good update. It's certainly not doom and gloom, which I've seen some places, where I think it's just people sort of overreacting to any change. There's definitely some areas, such as I feel that the negative penalties for goals conceded is now probably a little bit too harsh. I would have liked to see more happen in terms of forwards with regards to the subjective stats, big chance missed. But all in all, I think it's a good update. I hope that by talking through some of the examples of the players and how it influences the scoring can help you identify players that you might want to target, or players within your own gallery that may benefit. Please drop some comments in below. I'm more than happy to get into a debate on this and have a chat. Thank you very much.